Video games have been around for a long time, like ages. Ages as in 1958. England hadn't yet won their single World Cup that they'd never shut up about. Morgan Freeman was just a sprightly 21 years old, and One Piece was only on issue 500. There are many of us who remember the earlier days of gaming, and those fantastic games that we played once upon a time. Games have progressed massively over the last 60 years, but it is still tempting to play those games gone by and enjoy the earlier, blockier ages of gaming. Sadly, all too often we put on a game from our past and have our rose-tinted spectacles ripped off of our collective faces when we realise that the graphics on our treasured game look like old ham that's been pre-chewed. But never fear, there are many games which look just as good today as they always did, and for unknown numerical reasons, we have picked 10 games that may just live on forever. You know what doesn't live forever though? You. Go on, go outside, have a good walk. You never know, you might meet a really cool dog. Smash like and subscribe to increase your chances of meeting a cool dog. Also leave a comment down below of your favourite famous dog, and we might give you a free Steam key. What? Video games? Oh yeah. Number 10, The Curse of Monkey Island. The Monkey Island series is one of the most adored adventure game franchises ever. Fans fawn over the first two games in the series, and even over the most recent addition to the franchise, Return to Monkey Island. Less love is given to the third game, Curse of Monkey Island, despite the fact that it's actually rather good. Curse of Monkey Island saw the team change for this entry to the series, and in turn there were several changes to the series, especially in interface design and most notably, graphics. The graphics of Curse of Monkey Island are very different from the VGA style look of the first two games, which is a shame as the graphics of this third entry are possibly the best in the whole series, including the Monkey Island remasters. The game had a cartoony 90s Nickelodeon style vibe, and the fully animated and wonderfully voiced cutscenes really makes Curse of Monkey Island a must play, and looks as wonderful today as it always did, and will probably be one of the more timeless entries in the series to boot. Really looking forward to kids in 2050 doing the snow cone puzzle, because they're in for a treat. A hairy, pukey treat. Number 9, BioShock. Now, I know what you're thinking. BioShock isn't an old game. But I'm sorry to be the one who breaks this to you, but the original BioShock launched over 16 years ago. 16 years ago. It can now buy lottery tickets in the UK. Cue that Matt Damon aging gif, eh? BioShock was hugely hyped upon release, and in a rare move which seems to be happening much less these days, it lived up to that hype. BioShock is still a fantastic first-person shooter with minor RPG elements and atmospheric storytelling, and it has since become a classic of the FPS genre. BioShock is still completely accessible today. Firstly, the mechanics of first-person shooters on console had been really nailed down at this point, so in gameplay terms, BioShock still feels great too. But it's where design is concerned that BioShock comes into its own. The moody underwater of Rapture really captures the feeling of being there, this rotting underwater city, feeling like a real lived-in location. The detailed Art Deco design of Rapture holds up and looks amazing even in recent years too. The gloomy lighting and lush hallways of the city help to tell its story, the story of a city lost to decadence. If you somehow manage to avoid spoilers after all these years, that ending won't be quickly forgotten either. You know, the one where the Big Daddy is revealed to be just a bunch of gerbils in a large raincoat. Oops, sorry. Oops, slipped. Oop. Number 8, Street Fighter 3. Street Fighter 3 really used to be the black sheep of the series. Much like the original Street Fighter, few people spoke of it, and it didn't have the launch hype of some of its younger brethren. However, time has shown that Street Fighter 3 is a fantastic entry into the series, and arguably one of the greatest fighting games of all time. Street Fighter 3, whether that's Third Strike or its arcade version, is in many ways superior to Street Fighter 2, building upon what came before in almost every single way. But they did away with much of the roster, with all but Ryu and Ken being new, a move that didn't go down well with absolutely everyone in the community, and Street Fighter 3 also had much more high caliber competition in comparison to previous titles, with the likes of Tekken, Toshinden and Virtua Fighter making their way onto home consoles. It is highly likely that changes to the fashion of video game graphics affected the success of Street Fighter 3. While it may not be well documented these days, 2D graphics were often shunned by developers in the late 90s as they were seen as being old-fashioned. Consoles such as the PlayStation were proud that they were pushing the boundaries of 3D polygonal graphics, and 2D sprite-based games were seen by developers and fans as being part of the previous generation. But do not let that put you off. By the time of Street Fighter 3's release, developers had really mastered the art of smooth and sleek looking 3D sprites, and Street Fighter 3 is possibly the best looking fighting game of the whole of the 1990s. Number 7. Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island. The Super Nintendo Entertainment System took Mario to the next level. In recent years, Mario had been a dominant figure on SNES, with remasters of the Mario Bros. Trilogy in the form of Super Mario All-Star, Super Mario World, Mario Kart, and a whole slew of other titles such as Mario Paint and Yoshi's Safari. By the mid-90s, the next generation of consoles was upon us, but there was still life left in the old console yet, and 1995 also saw the release of Mario's latest mainline game, Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island. Taking advantage of the Mario IP's latest iconic character, Yoshi, the player must guide an infant Mario through each level, and the game features new mechanics not before seen in a Mario game, but would become commonplace in later Yoshi releases. The mid-90s saw developers attempting to push the SNES to its graphical limits, with the Donkey Kong Country series and Killer Instinct both using 3D pre-rendered graphics to create 2D sprites and levels, but Yoshi's Island stuck to the style of previous Mario games and using animated sprites instead. But what separates Yoshi's Island from previous Mario games is the style of the 2D sprites used. Yoshi's Island employs a crayon-inspired cartoon style using pastel colours with thick dark edges, has the look of a children's storybook, and still holds up beautifully today. The Yoshi series has continued its unique cutesy style, and most recently saw 2019's Yoshi's Crafted World employ a craft materials graphical style, proving that good dinosaurs never go extinct. Number 6. Okami. Okami is one of those games that everyone wished had been a huge success, but was a flop when it came to sales instead. While it received universal praise from multiple publications, poor sales figures led to it never getting a full-fat sequel, aside from a minor entry on the Nintendo DS, which absolutely nobody seems to remember happening. Do you? Let us know down below. Okami draws greatly on Japanese folklore, and the player takes the role of Wolf Amaterasu, who must save the cursed land. Okami is an ambitious game, being an action-adventure, platformer and puzzle title, and there's no surprise that one of Okami's main influences was The Legend of Zelda. While the game is largely linear, it features many side quests to take on as well as the main story. One of Okami's main strengths is its art style, as much of Okami's art style attempts to replicate the style of Japanese sumi-e ink painting. Strong ink lines, brushstrokes and a watercolour aesthetic really give the impression this game is painted on a canvas. Okami also uses old French cel shading to achieve the painting style of art, which allowed the game to have a vivid, bright and bold colour palette. This style seriously helps with the traditional settings of Okami, with Amaterasu venturing around forests, villages and lake in beautiful colour. Given the game is now over 15 years old, it still looks fantastic today, and while everyone who probably wants to play Okami has played it by now, you should still give it a chance, as it's a real whipper. Number 4. Tempest. Playing games from 40 years ago isn't easy. Let's be honest now, there's plenty of shallow gameplay, awful graphics and flat out broken games out there, with titles such as E.T. and the Atari port of Pac-Man being only two of a sea of terrible, dreadful video games that were released during that era. There were of course many great games out there too, and many of these could be found in the arcades of the 80s. Space Invaders, Centipede and Asteroids and many others would become gaming legends based solely on their dominance of the early arcade. Many of these games look great still, but definitely are a product of the era. However, there is one game which could easily pass for an indie release in the 2020s. Tempest used a graphical style which seemingly briefly appeared in arcades in the early 80s. Wireframe vector graphics were often used to replicate 3D objects in video games. Imagine polygons at their most basic, with the mere meshes being used without any textures on the model themselves. It was perhaps most notably used in the famous sit-down arcade cabinet Star Wars. Tempest is a simple game in which you move a claw left and right around the edge of an abstract trench. Enemies move up the trench and the aim of the game is to shoot them and gain a high score. So far, so arcade. The simple gameplay helps Tempest hold up, but the main reason why it looks so good still is those sleek straight cover lines, which contrast quite nicely against the void-like black background. It does genuinely look like a game that could be released today. We will accept Tetris here instead, which will also just never get old, and is apparently beatable after all. What a little chad that kid is. There was only one thing I was beating at that age, and it wasn't Tetris. Oh, it was childhood obesity. Yeah. Number 4, Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty. The PlayStation 1 and Co. all helped to push advancements in 3D graphics, and this in turn saw developers become more and more inventive when it came to game design. Games were becoming more and more cinematic and dramatic, while systems using CD technology could add high quality soundtracks. Metal Gear Solid 1 was a perfect example of just this. Hideo Kojima put everything into making Metal Gear Solid a smash hit for the PlayStation, and he was successful, with many gamers having fond MGS memories all these years later. A sequel was guaranteed, and just over 3 years later, Metal Gear Solid 2 would land on the PlayStation 2. The PlayStation 2 really saw a maturing of graphics for multiple games, with its graphics being a big leap up from the blocky polygons and blurry, wobbly textures of the original PlayStation. Despite being an early game in the PS2's lifecycle, Metal Gear Solid 2 still looks great even today. Superb looking character models, clean and sharp textures, and some great lighting effects all help to retain the impact of the original release over 20 years later. Of course, Metal Gear games have seen improved graphics in the years since, perhaps even the PS2's Metal Gear Solid 3 potentially looking better. But Metal Gear Solid 2 just hits different, with its murky atmosphere, orchestral score, improved voice acting and cutscenes, and it still looks great today. However, Sons of Liberty's themes and messages are what will keep it timeless above all else. Kojima's warnings of an overabundance of content for the sake of content, he definitely wasn't talking about our channel, right? And nostalgia-baiting franchises was remarkably prescient, but the messages of staying true to yourself while holding your loved ones close will always be relevant. Number 3, Journey. Journey made a huge impact when it was released in 2012. Multiplayer gaming had become a streamlined experience on console, and it felt like developers were taking more chances on unique multiplayer experiences a decade ago. While the game was designed to be predominantly a lonely experience, as your character treks across vast deserts, there were brief occasions when you'd meet other players in-game, but with no clear way to communicate with them. The only task is to reach the top of a distant mountain. There's no other quests or tasks, just explore as you go. Despite being over 10 years old, the minimalist aesthetic of Journey still looks stunning. Abstract character design gives the game an ageless quality, and the nature of the character design is the opposite of the deserts you'll encounter. Physics are a huge part of this game's charm, as developers were really nailing cloth and sand physics, and they look wonderful here in Journey, and still do. Journey's visuals and audio were widely praised, but people also praised the emotional impact of travelling with strangers. Journey's use of light and shadow, as well as a carefully curated colour palette, also helped to make this game a gorgeous title to play, even today. As much a work of art as it is a game, the sense of togetherness and companionship when travelling with others gives the game an unexpected emotional kick that will still be relevant decades from now when we're all plugged into the Matrix and our brains are being milked by ChatGPT to help it write the next Fast and Furious movie. Number 2, The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. The turn of the century saw the popularisation of a very particular art style. Cel-shaded graphics were all the rage and were featured in many video games during the first decade of the new millennium. This art style wasn't popular with everyone, and there were many who simply didn't like its more cartoonish aesthetic. That being said, many cel-shaded games still look great years after their release. We could probably do an entire list of just cel-shaded titles that still hold up well today, and there were several considered for inclusion on this list. Games such as 13 and Jet Set Radio all still look as fresh today as they did some 20 years ago, and that also goes for The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. Many Zelda fans though were appalled by the childish big-headed Link running around a pastel-coloured Hyrule, especially after that more realistic tech demo for the GameCube that came out in 2000. Personally, I remember my friends as a kid being very angry that their favourite franchise was going, quote, gay, while I habitually drowned in the water temple in Ocarina of Time. Despite the hate for Wind Waker's art style, it is actually beloved by Zelda fans today, and arguably looks better than some Zelda games that came after Wind Waker. The game is bright and breezy, with its design now becoming iconic in the Zelda canon. The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker holds up exceptionally well, and is probably the finest example of cel-shaded graphics of all time. What's your favourite Zelda game? Is it this one? Let us know down below. Number 1, Minecraft. Across the whole history of gaming, there have been few video games with aesthetics as recognisable as Minecraft. In the years since Minecraft's release, the use of simple, blocky video game graphics has been incorporated in multiple releases, but despite the video game marketplace being deluged with Minecraft-alikes, it is Minecraft who is still associated with this unique art style. Minecraft was one of the very first examples of mainstream early access games and allowed players to purchase the game for a cheaper price point at its alpha and beta phases. While there have been many updates in the run up to Minecraft's release and post-release, one thing that hasn't changed massively are its graphics. While other relatively modern games are seeing upscales, remasters or even remakes, Minecraft still looks almost exactly as it did back when it first made its debut in 2009. As we've previously mentioned, Minecraft's blocky graphic style has been emulated many times over the years, and it is because of this that the impact of these graphics has lessened over time. But back when Minecraft first launched, they were unique, different and impressive, and though their impact has been diluted just a little bit, you only have to load up Minecraft and take a look around its immersive and huge game world, and you'll find Minecraft is just as beautiful today as it always was, and it's still easy to get lost in its many worlds to boot too. There's a good chance that Minecraft will just live forever. And that was our list for some video games that may never truly die. What are some games that you think will age beautifully as well? Or are there any games we highlighted that might not age as well as we think? Be sure to let us know down in the comments hole down below. I've been Jimmy Denellen for Cultured Vultures, and thank you for watching.